Pour something flammable into your glass. It's Jaded Gamercast. My name is Lang. With me, as always, is Nathan. Nathan, I'm drinking. I don't remember if I had this last time. Do you remember? What did I talk about? My hillbilly old fashioned.
Oh, I don't think so. I mean, you might have. I mean, it was a month ago.
It was a
Cut
while
me some
ago.
slack.
But yeah, so I've started making different types of old fashioned and whiskey drinks, and then this one is, it's cherry moonshine, lime bitters, with sweet tea.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
I mean, let's be real though. Literally anything with sweet tea is gonna be good.
Yeah, it's solid. I mean, I'm certainly I've been drinking them a lot lately. I've been doing a lot of different stuff with moonshine just because I'm getting a little tired of just making regular old fashions in my basement. So yeah, this has been the go-to. What are you drinking tonight?
Right now I am finishing off a coffee with maple cream, but then I have my coffee whiskey.
You're so old.
As backup.
You and your damn coffee drinks.
Listen, it was like 9:30 my time, and Terry's like, "Are you ready to podcast?" I'm like, "I am ready for a fucking nap. Maybe I should make some coffee or something because
I guess so.
Oh shit."
So yes,
old.
It's been a month. We had a great episode last time. Ended with my story about how I killed my party. There were no comments about it afterwards. I expected there to be some comments, but I think everyone was just quietly uncomfortable with that story. So, I learned a lot. I learned a lot as a DM through that. So even the listeners of this podcast being sort of shocked into silence tells me a lot about how that whole situation went. I completely forgot about this, but hey, I'll throw it out there just in case it's something we want to talk about later. Did you see the whole diversity in Dungeons & Dragons blog post from Wizards?
I did not.
Oh man, Dungeons & Dragons is super racist. We'll talk about it later.
Okay, I'm happy. That sounds exciting.
I knew I wanted to talk about this at some point, but we'll sort of save it to the end when we do the DM question and then we talk about Dungeons and Dragons, because I've been having a great time with this all week long. So I'm looking forward to actually talking about it on the podcast. But what have you been up to with the hobby lately, Nathan? Since I don't do anything with the hobby anymore.
Indeed. Honestly, I've just been kind of building shit. The problem is it's fucking 2020 and tournaments don't exist. And as you know, I am a deadline tournament painter. So, 100% of my hobby schedule is built around big events like, Adepticon or Gen Con or things like that, where it's just hey, this is a reason to pick that project that that I'm excited for. And then that's always my goal line. I go to it. I always get that hobby high where it's just this was amazing. This is perfect. I'm so excited. And I'll grab a new project while I'm there and I'll start on it. And then it fizzles out until there's an actual event for it. But it's 2020, man. Nothing happens anywhere. So in terms of hobby progress, I've just been kind of building some minis in the backlog. I built some for the kid for a game called Mythos, which has kind of a Lovecraftian horror kind of vibe to it. And other than that, I've been building bases to eventually get off my ass and build up, because I made a big Bushido purchase for more Cult of Ure stuff. So I have more more samurai zombies and witches and things of that nature. But they're pewter minis, and I honest to God hate pewter. So I've just been going ham on making scenic bases with lots of details. So I feel like I'm making progress when in reality I'm just procrastinating.
Oh man. Yeah, that's rad.
Listen, the minis are really nice, and I love the rule set, which is why Bushido, despite being pewter, is a game that will always have a special place in my heart. But goddamn, working with pewter is just one of those things that I just psych myself into because it's
Mhm.
such a shitty medium.
It really is. All of my biggest horror stories when it comes to modeling are all pewter minis,
Hmm.
mismolds and mold lines and just fucked up shit. There's always that confusion of like, is that hand supposed to look like that, or is it a little smooth because it really didn't fill in properly, or you pull that Marine out of the box and he's missing part of his knee, and you have to like go green stuff it in or make it look like battle
Well,
damage or some shit,
and,
right?
and
Like,
again, not to mention the fact that like when those pieces cool, there's such a huge variance.
mhm.
Because I don't think we will ever forget the crew talks.
No.
Like how many, like when we were working there, how many people would come in and be like, my crew talks is broken. Look at the mixed mold. And we're like, no, honest to God, that's how they ship them.
Yep.
Everyone is like that. And then helping them like bend the legs to try to make it fit and showing them
Yep.
how to green stuff it. And then that fucking store army we did where we're like, we're gonna have 3 crew talks. And I'm like, is it because you hate us? Like, is this why we have to build 3 of
No,
these
part of the reason
bastards?
why we had to do those was because we did take a couple of them back, And when we take them back, it's like, well, they just go into the back room and we just have extra pieces. And if we decide to, we eventually paint them. Um,
Yeah.
it was funny. Speaking of the hobby, Maddie was telling me about, he was at some sort of barbecue. And 2 guys come in and they start talking about gene stealers. And so, of course, like Matt's ears perk up. He's like, there's nothing they could be talking about other than Warhammer 40,000. So he sort of chimes in and he's like, oh, yeah, you guys getting into Warhammer 40,000? They're like, yeah, we've only been playing it for about a year. We're just getting into it. Like we got our armies up. They're like, oh, do you play? He's like, I've been playing since I was 15. I've probably dropped close to maybe 20 or 30 grand into it, nonstop tournaments. He's like, and then I quit. It's a gigantic waste of time and money. They were kind of taken back by that whole situation because like that's a lot to drop on 2 guys sort of excited to get into the hobby, at some
Hmm.
bro bra barbecue talking about gene stealers and shit, where like one dude's there and he's like, don't do it, it's not worth it, just don't,
It's like the
just step away
fucking
now.
Nom vet
Yeah.
walking on the plane after his tour and all these fucking bright-eyed gung-ho like, we're gonna fucking win the war.
Oh yeah,
Walking off. Yeah.
very much so. So I get a kick out of that, man. That's a great time. All right, so let's get into some topics of conversation on today's show. The first one I'm going to bring about it just came up in the last couple of days, and it has to do with Star Wars and the sequel trilogy. So the last 3 Star Wars movies that came out for J.J. Abrams, Rian Johnson, and then J.J. Abrams again. There's a big rumor going around the internet, which is most people are just saying it's hearsay and it's all rumor, but there are a few YouTube channels and a few publications on the net that have basically said, there are sources within Lucasfilm who have supposedly confirmed this and who have come out to say, here's what we're going to be doing to fix Star Wars for, Star Wars fans. So the crux of this idea, which supposedly Kathleen Kennedy is absolutely 100% against and trying desperately to like kill,
Mm-hmm.
is the idea that they want to retcon the last 3, the sequel trilogy. That using some Star Wars lore and some stuff that happened in the show Rebels, they want to essentially make the sequel trilogy into like just another dimension where, in this other timeline, this shit happened, but like this isn't part of the prime timeline. And the stuff that essentially caused this timeline to happen will be stopped. And when it's stopped, it will have never happened. Luke will have never become a saddled homeless man. Palpatine will have never lived, etc., etc., etc. I can go into more details, but that's essentially the idea. It sounds like their goal is to bring a good chunk of the extended universe back into the story and then start telling new stories from those. But it's all very up in the air. There's a couple of interesting points that are sort of substantiated by some scenes in The Rise of Skywalker that sort of echo the things that we saw in Rebels. So it's a plausible explanation, but it is essentially what is rumored to be this is what the talks are about at Lucasfilm right now. So before I get into like the details of exactly what this plan is, like, what's your first reaction to that? Because I'm excited.
I was gonna say, I think it's stupid. I think it is utterly beyond the pale, like pants on head stupid. Because anytime you start pandering to the internet mob, you've already fucking lost. And like you first have to understand that you will never release another Star Wars film that fans like. Like, just understand, the Star Wars fandom is probably the most toxic mainstream fandom in existence right now. And literally nothing that you do will ever appease them. So for me, I'm just like, I think it's stupid, because all you're gonna do is you're gonna say you're gonna shit on these movies and the like $3 billion that you've made for it.
The total $3 billion, yeah.
Right? You're gonna relegate them to like this fucking side corner,
yes,
and then you're gonna make more movies that Star Wars fans are gonna bitch about, and then Rotten Tomatoes review bomb. Like this is like, that's, I think, the biggest reason why I'm just like, I just think it's stupid. I think it's a stupid, shitty idea, because at the end of the day, those movies are more consistent with the Star Wars universe than the prequels are.
Ooh.
And
I don't know about that. Go ahead, continue your thought.
Listen, the prequels shit all over everything in the Star Wars movies. Yoda never trained Obi-Wan, despite what Obi-Wan tells Luke in Empire Strikes Back. What the fuck is midichlorians? Like, the prequels were an unmitigated disaster, and yet enough time has passed that we're all just like, yeah, they're Star Wars, I guess.
Well,
and I think you're better off telling new stories than trying to retcon it and give us more Skywalker stories. Like, the Skywalker family is stupid.
Yeah.
Can we move on, please?
I agree with some of the things that you said, but I do disagree on a lot of those points. But these are places where I know that we're rarely going to agree. We never have. Mm-hmm. I think when it comes to something like this, from my perspective, if you were to say to me, okay, you know, Lang, you've got some great ideas when it comes to TV and shows, like, how would you write another Star Wars movie sort of picking up from where these last three movies left off? And I have thought about this a lot because I'm a nerd, and it's almost impossible to create a quote unquote Star Wars movie based on what this movie trilogy has done. They've painted themselves into a corner to the point where they can't release new movies that have to do with Jedi because the Jedi don't exist anymore. You know, there's one girl, she stole somebody's name. She's out on Tatooine doing fuck knows what. You know, she built her own lightsaber, but who knows what the hell she's going to do. Not to mention the fact that these actors don't want to come back to reprise these roles because they hated these movies as well. And when you go through all of the checkboxes of like, well, how do we do this? It's like, you've got maybe two options. Maybe we make a Star Wars series that has nothing to do with the Jedi and nothing to do with the Sith and nothing to do with the Republic and nothing to do with the Empire. And it's just smugglers and mafia crime bosses and Hutts. Like, that's it. That's your only option for making Star Wars movies right now. But those aren't Star Wars movies. Those are essentially just sci-fi. They're just sci-fi shows that kind of take place in this universe. The core of the Star Wars universe is Jedi and Sith and all of these other big things. And the Sith are gone. The Jedi are gone. They've gone down this rabbit hole to the point where their only option is something like the High Republic or the Old Republic, if they actually had the balls to do it. And it looks as though they've taken the group of Star Wars writers who were heavily involved in the sequel trilogy, and they've moved them over to the High Republic where they can write a Star Wars show with no war and more diversity and dinosaurs. You know what I mean? Like, they can go write that shit to their heart's desire over there. Right. But I think the higher ups at Disney and Lucasfilm, you know, Bob Iger and Bob, whatever his name is, the other two are looking at this thing going like, these were colossal failures. They were critical failures. You know, outside of The Force Awakens, these did not make the kind of money we expected. We can't sell toys for any of this stuff because nobody likes the characters. Nobody wants anything to do with any of these characters anymore. And they've literally found a situation where there's just nothing they can do about it. But then they have The Mandalorian, which was a good, popular Star Wars show that came out. It was pretty well across the board accepted and enjoyed, and the Star Wars fan base liked it. There were people who didn't like it. You found it a little boring near the end. I also agreed it did get long in the tooth near the end, and the show had some problems. But for the most part, everybody liked it. There were very few people who didn't like it. So that's where I sort of disagree with the idea that like this toxic fan base is going to just disregard everything out of hand. Rogue One worked, even though Solo was sort of meh. People still like, they didn't hate Solo. They didn't go after it and like tear it apart the way that they tore apart the sequel trilogy. This is one of the biggest franchises in the world, right? It has the potential to be the biggest movie series in the world, right? Like there was no reason why The Rise of Skywalker couldn't have been as successful as Endgame, It has all of the potential to do this.
You're right. It could have. Then they literally hired the wrong creative team.
Correct.
Like start to finish.
What's interesting about this as well is that it, and I'll sort of get into the details of what this is, okay? And I'll just sort of high level it for you, okay? So in Rebels, which is a great show, I recommend you watch it.
Oh yeah. Oh, I've watched it all.
You've watched it. Okay, so in Rebels, you remember the Veil of the Force in the last season? It was called the Veil of. It was like the black plane where you heard all the voices from the different. Right.
Yep. And where he rescued Ahsoka.
That's correct. Yes, and we'll be doing some Rebel spoilers here, by the way.
Yeah, I was gonna say spoilers for a show that ended 5 years ago, guys.
Correct. And you're crazy if you haven't watched Rebels. It's a very, very good show, and it ties into The Mandalorian as well. So it's definitely worth watching. So in the Veil of the Force, he reaches back in time through this mirror to pull Ahsoka through into the Veil of the Force. And then she goes back, and then that's how she survives her encounter with Vader. We also see that Palpatine has access to the Veil of the Force through Sith magics and through these mirrors. And it's been said that, he knows about the Mortis, and he knows about, that whole story of like these Force deities, these Force gods that sort of keep things in the balance in the background. So what basically it comes down to is they've said that like on the Death Star, the second Death Star, as well as on a few other places, Palpatine had these Sith rooms that were essentially these mirror rooms where he would be able to use these mirrors to peer into the Veil of the Force and see alternate timelines and see different situations. And this is what helped him, overthrow the Jedi, hide his power, know where to go, know what to do, how to do it. And through this, that essentially put him in that situation. So when in Return of the Jedi, Vader threw him over the edge and he fell down, he basically pulled himself into the Veil of the Force without the use of a mirror. And that's why he's all effed up and screwed up. So he then found another mirror, which took him to Exegol. And then from there, he began building the final order. For fuck's sakes.
That makes he started a breeding program. Yes. They started to build shit. Like, fuck off.
Oh,
the whole thing.
The whole thing is a fucking idiotic joke. So
fucking JJ.
The premise of this, the premise of this whole thing is that after all that happens, and essentially now there's no Jedi, there's no Sith, there's no Republic, there's no government, there's nothing going on in the galaxy right now because everything has been wiped out. Except apparently Ewoks are like throwing spears at Star Destroyers on Endor, and they're like burning and crashing to the ground. That somebody is going to go into the Veil of the Force, and they are going to essentially, knowing that Palpatine has done this and that is how he survived, that they are going to find him in the Veil of the Force and stop him from getting to Exegol, likely in his weakened state, just killing him. And that this will essentially remove that timeline from existence, and the sequel trilogy will essentially be relegated to this Star Wars Legends backlog of like other timeline stories, right? Where this absolutely happened at one point, but like it actually was stopped, and that it's not actually what happened in this story. And this is supported by a scene in Rise of Skywalker where Rey goes to the ruins of the Death Star on one of the moons of Endor. and she's like walking through this chamber, and the chamber, you can see there's a bunch of mirrors, there's a bunch of broken mirrors, and then when she picks up the Sith Wayfinder, she like looks over her shoulder and she sees
MacGuffin.
Yeah, she sees the evil version of herself, which is essentially an alternate timeline version of Rey, who then steps out of the mirror and attacks her. And then that's the thing. So like there is a sort of a precedent.
Oh my God, that is such a stretch to explain the trailer bit. Like, because like, let's be real, that whole scene existed so they could put an evil Rey in the trailer and have people be like, oh my God, there's nothing. Okay, so 2 things.
Yep.
First, I'm going to address what you said before that. Then I'm going to address the whole explainer, and again, why it's even stupider.
By all means.
So first of all, you're right when you say that, like, what do you do for afterwards? Be creative. Guys, it's been 10,000 years and technology has not progressed in Star Wars. Star Wars is a setting. All we've done is smooth some lines and make pointier ships in 10,000 years from the Old Republic
anymore,
to now.
Nathan, they're not chrome anymore.
Exactly. So, what do you do to do new Star Wars stories? Talk about how this happened 200 years ago. The Jedi are back. Why? Who fucking cares? There are Jedi again. Like Force users found the books that Rey stole and they did this and the legends and like, you can even do like In a Mirror Darkly where like they're Jedi, but kind of like, if kind of like the cosplayers that try to like go back and be like, we're at a Ren fair. You know what I mean? Where it's just like they're missing some shit.
I'm a real knight.
Exactly. You can explain this away, especially in Star Wars. Because unlike, say, Star Trek, where we have seen technological progression from the fucking days of OS all the way through to Picard, Star Wars is a static setting. These things exist. These are true. So how do you tell a story after these while you maintain them canon? Literally just time jump, because it makes no fucking difference. So I mean, like, that's why, like, for me, I'm just like, eh. Secondly, while all of that in Rebels is great, I would like you to just think about how do you explain all of that in a movie? So you're fucking Disney. You're going to make a movie where the first half is dedicated towards explaining this magic and why you're going to invalidate the other movies. Like the comparison would be if Avengers Infinity War decided to explain away that like the entire phase 1 and 2 of the MCU just didn't fucking happen. And so we have a new Avengers crew and it's made up of all of these fuckers that you've never seen before. It's going to fall flat because from a storytelling perspective, while you and I, as like hardcore nerds, we've watched all of Rebels, we know these things and we see these elements that existed and we understand that you could write yourself out of that corner. I honestly cannot think of a way in a feature-length film that you could explain that and reboot and set it all up. So either you're saying that Disney is going to release one single movie that exists only to reboot their universe and then release a new trilogy. Or they're just going to pretend it didn't happen. Like, you can't explain it to your mother. Legitimately, like, sit your mom down and explain to her everything that you just said, and she's gonna stare back at you like you're fucking crazy. You've lost it.
First off, I can't explain simple like story hooks to my mom. Okay, like my mother and I, like, we'll sit down and we watched Blade Runner 2049 or whatever it was, right? And I spent, like, that movie's already long. There was like an hour tacked on to there was an hour tacked onto that movie as I was explaining that to her. Okay, so I want to, I'm going to address a few things you said here. So the first thing is doing like the 200-year time jump. Yeah, that is sort of like the obvious option. But the problem with that is it's going to be really hard to do all that again because you are going to have to do a significant amount of world building. We've seen in a lot of cinema that audiences have a very hard time with big time jumps. This is part of the reason why it's taking so long to get Avatar 2 out. Like Avatar 2 is supposed to be like 100, 200 years later or something like that, right? Like when you establish a world and you establish a fiction like Star Wars, that loose continuity between the movies where you can say like this much time has passed or this much time has passed is really important. And that fans and not fans, I'm sorry, fans don't have a problem with it, as you said, but like the average moviegoer is going to have a hard time, even with like a 1 year jump in the future or a 5 year jump in the future. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of world building and environment setting that has to happen in order for that to work. Now, the other thing that you were saying is like they would have to release a movie. It's not all that different from how the new Star Trek was done, where they sort of said, yes, this is a new Star Trek, and this is Kirk, and this is Spock, and Uhura, and all that kind of stuff. But what came before also came before, and then here's how these things work. I had to explain that to my mom a lot. It was very hard for her to understand that Spock was here and Spock was there. And like, I don't think that, I mean, keep in mind, this is Disney, okay? They introduced the Emperor in a Fortnite event. Like, there are ways of putting shit out there to sort of explain it. You could even explain a large portion of it with a good trailer. You know what I mean? Like, opening teaser trailer that says, here's what's coming, and then the movie just sort of builds off of that trailer, and it's just like a 10-minute opener that basically says, here's where we are, here's what happened. Now, the problem with that, obviously, is that we're never going to get the core cast of Star Wars on screen together ever again. That opportunity was wasted. And the situation now is more like they know that they can't just make more Star Wars, but they don't want to throw away, you know, like, for instance, where The Mandalorian is, where it's picking up after Return of the Jedi. 7 years has passed. And, you know, like there's the Imperial Remnant and the Republic is slowly building itself up, and it's like the Wild West out on the fringes. But all of this sounds like they're really leaning into Dave Filoni, who did Rebels and the Clone Wars, and who also wrote for The Mandalorian, you know, and Jon Favreau, because like these guys are hot commodities right now. The fans like them. You know, like they work really well. They've got the right sort of idea behind making Star Wars like Star Wars products. You know, like Dave Filoni has 3 successful Star Wars products under his belt at this point. So that I'm excited for, but I just think that like there is no really good way of fixing this. And even like a time jump where you go like 200 years in the future and you're just like, yeah, the Jedi are back. Fuck it, whatever. Yeah, they're all a bunch of cowboys. They don't know what the fuck they're doing. Like even that requires so much setup in order for people to sort of figure out like what the fuck is going on in this world, you know? And I would be worried that they would just do like oh yeah, well there's another empire. It's called you thought it was the Last Order, but it's not. This one is.
Yeah, but I mean, again, that has been the trend for 3 trilogies now. You know, so I mean like, like, I don't know. I've said this to Terry. I don't know if I've said this to you, but I'm just like, after Last Jedi, or not Last Jedi, after Rise of Skywalker, I just don't care about Star Wars.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just so indifferent to it as a franchise.
Yep.
Because when you just, like I said, you look at something, it's 11 movies, 4 of which are amazing, 7 of which are shit. Like you just have to look at it and just be like, you know, what the fuck, man? At least with Star Trek movies, it was the even odd thing. Right. Even movies were great. Odd movies were shit.
Yeah.
But like 50% is a hell of a lot higher than Star Wars is batting right now.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, for me, it's just like, I can honestly say that as someone who, again, loves Star Wars so much, I have more Star Wars tattoo per inch on my body than not. If they did that, I wouldn't even watch them.
Well, and
I genuinely just think it's a shit idea.
Hey, don't get me wrong. I think that's fair. But I don't think you're the person they're making this for anymore, right? Like, I think that Star Wars being such a big franchise, such a big money-making franchise, it's so recognizable that you can't just say like, well, we fucked up, not much we can do now, and then sit there and go, I guess we just won't make movies for the next 5 years and hope everybody forgets. Like this
again, especially with Disney being the owners, because I think a more responsible, not Warner, they're the worst movie studio in the fucking existence right now. But Disney is gonna milk a franchise until it fucking like bleeds. Um, I think the biggest problem is
Well, hold on. This is what I was trying to say was that, you
okay.
know, like they are making this movie for the fans who either felt betrayed or who have essentially lost all faith in Star Wars, who, you know, were very upset about the sequel trilogy and they didn't like what was done and they didn't like what the story was or how it went or how it was written or how it was directed or anything, right? Like how they killed off all the characters. Like these are the sorts of things that, you know, in a normal setting you would say, well, you can't take that back, right? But from Disney's perspective, they're just like, fucking, why can't we take this back? Like we made a mistake, and there is 50% of the Star Wars fandom, right, that did not like The Last Jedi. And then when we got to Rise of Skywalker, pretty well everybody didn't like it on both sides, and they were like, man, we fucked this up bad.
Listen, Rise of Skywalker was so bad I can't even watch Force Awakens anymore because I just see all of JJ's like fucking breadcrumbs. I'm so clever, and they just annoy me.
I couldn't watch Force Awakens after I watched The Last Jedi, and then Rise of Skywalker basically put that nail in that coffin, which is part of the reason why I'm okay with them just going like, yeah, you know what, we're gonna make it so that we fixed the timeline. They didn't exist.
I think here is my fundamental problem with it.
Okay.
Disney is the wrong owners. So when you go back to George Lucas, right? George Lucas has said time and time again that Star Wars movies are like they're fucking space wizard movies for kids. And they have always been geared for children. And that has been what he's wanted. Like the original trilogy was fucking little boys aged 8 to 14 were his target demographic because he wanted to sell toys. Prequels he skewed earlier. Disney being so large that they should absolutely be broken up by antitrusts. It is criminal how big Disney is. Disney doesn't make narrow movies like that. They don't make movies for kids. They make movies for everyone. And I think that's the fundamental problem with the entire sequel trilogy and Han Solo and everything else. Everything they've tried to do has been, you know, try to get that sweet Marvel sauce on it, where this is a movie that will appeal to absolutely everyone in every age demographic because it is fun and it is these things. And that doesn't really work for Star Wars.
I think it could work for Star Wars.
I mean, maybe I'd like to see it because so far they're 0 for 5 on that model. And that's not to say that they haven't released movies that I enjoy. That's not to say that they're all bad.
Yeah.
But they have never gotten a unanimous, like, critical consensus. Like, they've never had an Avengers level hit with one of these Star Wars movies. They're 0 for 5 on it.
Yeah.
And I think part of that problem is due to the generational differences in the trilogies. You'll never be able to find something that captures it for everyone, because at the end of the day, the prequels are so vastly different than the original trilogy that, like, you know, in style, in substance, in tone, these are two completely different, almost genres. The only glue is it's called Star Wars and there are Jedi with lightsabers. And so you have these older generation like us. Like, let's be real. Like, we are the OG Star Wars generation.
Oh, I know.
Where it's just like, we want a more serious, strong story. Then you have the prequel generation. They clearly don't give a shit about story because the prequel story is awful, like start to finish. It's just fucking bad.
I mean, it's not good. I'm not gonna.
It was great choreography.
Yeah.
It was cool special effects. It was fight scenes. It was starfighter scenes. Like, it was way more fast-paced action.
Yes.
And so, like I said, you just have this incongruity where if you are a company saying, I'm going to make a Star Wars movie that's going to appeal to everyone, I think you are already starting at a disadvantage compared to any other established or original franchise. And that's why I think you can't win.
Well, I do think you can win. And I think that you touched on something that I was going to say about it. You know, Harry Potter is a movie series about wizards for kids. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And it's just, we add space wizards in there and hey, it's fucking Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
Harry Potter has the right idea, and it's sort of similar to the way that Marvel handled these things, where we're like, listen, our movies are going to grow and evolve with the audience, but that requires a long-term plan. It requires a person who is essentially going to either be at the helm of it or who has written the books and is essentially the person who took it in its own way. You know, we can't run into a situation like Game of Thrones where, you know, the first bunch of seasons are great and then the show just slides horrifically downhill as the, you know, that good old copy paste book content dries up and D&D are revealed to be utter hacks. But the thing with Star Wars is you can't make Star Wars and then make a prequel trilogy 25 years later. And then another 15 or 20 years after that, make a sequel trilogy and expect those three trilogies to line up in any way, shape, or form, because there's so much of a gap between there where you're saying like, oh, we're the original Star Wars generation. And then, you know, kids who are 20 years younger than us are the prequel generation, you know, Matt and younger. And then, you know, and then my kids are essentially going to be the sequel trilogy generation in the sense that they're, you know, young when these movies came out and these movies are supposed to be speaking to them. So in all of those generations, like there's no consistency between the storytelling. If you're going to make more Star Wars and you're going to reset the timeline and pick up from the foundation of the original trilogy and say, listen, we've got this foundation of the original trilogy, which means if we just take that, we can start coming up with stories that we can build over time. And we can have these be a movie series that starts young and builds its way up, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
But I don't disagree that Star Wars is in an absolutely horrific place right now and that Disney is clamoring to find a way of doing it. And you said earlier, like, just be creative, come up with this stuff. I don't think you can just say, well, just be creative, because if you leave what's there, and you say it's 200 years later, there's still going to be a massive portion of the Star Wars fan base that is already so disenfranchised that they don't want anything to do with it. And I do understand the perspective that they have at Disney and at Lucasfilm when they're looking at this going, there's nothing to build on here. If we could just go back to here, we can make shows like The Mandalorian and we can make other stuff, because that's a great place to tell stories from. That's a great place to start things off. And, you know, like, they're going to be able to get Mark Hamill back if they reset it. He'll be happier than anybody that they reset these fucking movies and took them out of the timeline. You know what I mean? So like he can come back and show up in the movies or show up in the stuff and just not be a primary character. We don't need the Skywalkers to continue on, but it's like, you know, it's the same thing in the extended universe. If you read those books, you know, the Skywalkers sort of fall to the back a little bit, and their focus does tend to be a lot of these other Jedi out there in the galaxy doing shit. And like, those were good stories. Those were interesting stories.
They absolutely were interesting stories, because even though they were set in this backdrop of, you know, post Return of the Jedi, we know that Luke, Leia, Han, and Chewie exist. And sure, we might bump into them. The focus became other characters. And that's honestly what I wanted out of this sequel trilogy. Because I remember when they announced that they re-signed Harrison Ford and, you know,
we both said the same thing on the podcast back then. Like, this is a mistake. Don't do that. Like, don't.
It was a huge fucking mistake to just be like, we're back to the Skywalker well, because we have no original ideas. And then the fact that you put, you know, you had like you said, they didn't have a plan, and it was evident, you know, fucking movie after movie after movie, that each director was literally just winging it. And when you have JJ, like, first of all, JJ has never stuck a landing, so why Disney was just like, hey, guy who's literally never had a good series finale ever in your career, cap off Star Wars. Like, that was like, fuck me. Like,
I mean, we go back and listen to our review episode of Rise of Skywalker. We said it all there. Anyways, there's not a whole lot more to say on this one without sort of retreading a lot of old ground that you and I have tread many times. I'll wrap it up to say I'm intrigued by the idea that they are willing to do something that dramatic to either admit that they made a mistake or to apologize to the portion of the fan base that feels betrayed or unhappy. I'm not in your camp where I feel like this Star Wars fandom is so toxic that there's nothing that could ever be released, because we've seen lots of Star Wars content be released that's been received incredibly well recently too. So I think that it's all going to come down to, if you are going to do this, what's the story going to be? Are you going to double down on the extended universe and we're going to get Heir to the Empire and Thrawn? Well, you can't really do that because Luke is too old now. Mark Hamill's too old now. Are we going to jump ahead, far, far ahead, where we're building up to like the Yuuzhan Vong, or we're going to do something crazy from the books? Who knows, right? Or is it going to be a completely original story that,
just give me the Ezra Bridger story, man.
That's what I want, man. After watching Rebels,
that's what this should have fucking been in the first place. Should have been that 100%.
Like the Rebels proved, and everybody who read Heir to the Empire and has been a Star Wars fan for a long time knows that Thrawn is awesome. And he's one of the best characters ever written in Star Wars. And then when they brought him into Rebels, it was so fucking good. It was so good, and it was so well done that like
it was like them bringing in Thrawn was about the same point where they got their footing, right? Because you can tell early in season 1 it was just very sort of experimental. We're going to throw
Disney
shit
XD.
At the wall. Yeah, it was Disney XD. We're going to throw everything at the wall. We're going to see what ends up sticking. But around the time they introduced Thrawn was when they had, the characters kind of nailed. They understood them. They had these motivations, these relationships, these dynamics. And then Thrawn just cranked all that to fucking 11.
Right. Well, and it's the cartoon curse, right? Like you look at a lot of cartoons where the first season is just all over the fucking place. They don't really know what it's going to be. They don't really know what it's supposed to be. All they know is they need to sell some toys and that kids need to watch this shit. Like the first season of Clone Wars was not good. There's like a dubstep R2-D2 episode, and there's just a bunch of like random shit.
People, including you, keep telling me that Clone Wars gets good, but I'm 3.5 seasons in and I fucking hate the show.
It takes
like I am in the middle of season 3, and I'm like, I've had one good episode out of the last fucking 50. Like I can't do this anymore.
Listen, I said season 1. Good. I said season 1 was bad. I didn't say season 2 and 3 were good. That show gets slowly better, and then eventually gets to a point where it's pretty good. It never gets as good as Rebels. Rebels was something else entirely. It never gets as good as Rebels got. There are a few episodes later in the show that are real standouts, like really, really good episodes that are just well done, well constructed with really good stories. You actually, come to really like the clones, and like you feel for the clones, and like, but it takes a really, really long time because the show is just all over the damn place. And then they had this like dramatic shift in art style, I think at season 4, where like they had brand new animators come in who did like a completely different show, and everybody looked like it was Roblox. It was very weird. But Rebels, the first season's a little rough. It's very kiddie, but it does actually land pretty well at the end of the first season, where Darth Vader shows up and some shit gets a little bit real, and then you get into season 2 and it starts getting a little bit more real, and it starts getting a little bit more interesting. But like that is a problem. All right, let's move on here. We haven't had a chance to talk about this because we've been talking about everything else, and I don't think there's a lot of people out there that necessarily cared very much because it was so long between season 1 and season 2, but we are going to give you our season 2 review of Altered Carbon. Altered Carbon, you've read the books, Nathan.
Yes.
And you liked the books.
Yes. So, okay, I watched season 1 of Altered Carbon, and I loved it so much that I went out and I bought the trilogy, and I burned through them because, again, I read a shit ton of books. And so I was fucking amped for season 2.
Sorry, here we go. I'm back in. I think we had a little hiccup there.
Oh, okay. But yeah, so that was basically it. Is I love season 1 enough to go buy the books and read them. Kind of how Expanse was so good, I bought all the books.
Yeah. Altered Carbon's season 1, from the perspective of somebody who hasn't read the books. Mm-hmm. Like it was a great show. Started out good, high sci-fi, really entertaining. This sort of mixture of like Blade Runner and, more modern storytelling elements sort of tied in there. It's got a mystery that you're trying to unravel. They tell a lot in terms of flashbacks that inform.
Dude, it was like sci-fi noir.
They inform a lot about, the character of Takeshi. And Joel Kinnaman is an amazing actor who just carries the entire show on his back. Now, as soon as his sister shows up, the show does a swan dive and just starts getting stupid. They forget that they're a sci-fi show. All the sci-fi elements virtually disappear, except for when they need them to magically fix something. And the show really falls apart at the end, and you kind of just go like, all right, I mean, I'm here for season 2. I'm looking forward to this. And then Netflix, as per their weird ass fucking release model, decides that, the next season's not going to come out for 2 fucking solid years.
Yeah.
It makes me worry about the season 2 of The Witcher, right? Because we both really like The Witcher. And, it's like, hey, that was good. That was a great introduction to this show. That was a great 10 episode intro. Now give me the show. And they're like, well, you better hold on. 2 years from now, we'll have that show ready to go. It'll probably be later than that now because of the pandemic stuff. But, it's one of those things where if you're going to leave a show in a situation like you left Altered Carbon at the end, where he's just sort of there, we're throwing him in a new body, and he just walks out the door, and that's it. We don't really know what's happening next. We don't really know what's going on, but we know that he's still looking for his lost love. And, there's this sort of hint that she's out there and she's alive. 2 years later, they've got Anthony Mackie to come in. Now, I like Anthony Mackie. He's all right. He's an okay actor. He does not have the acting talent that Joel Kinnaman has, and the show suffers enormously because of it.
Yes. I was legitimately excited for Anthony Mackie because Anthony Mackie didn't look out of place in Avengers movies. Obviously, he's got a fucking D-bit role, because he's not making fucking Chris Evans money, right?
Right, or Robert Downey money.
Or Robert Downey money. I totally fucking get it, but he never looked out of place. And so when they announced that he was going to be playing Takeshi Kovacs, I was excited. I genuinely was. I was like, hey, listen, this is another great actor. He's going to be able to do as well of a job. Boy howdy though. So here is the fundamental thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Due to the universe of Altered Carbon, the fact that you can drop in and out of sleeves, you got stacks, you got all of this stuff. Each book has a dramatic tone shift. And it fucking works. It absolutely fucking works in the concept of that universe, right? So the first one is this sort of pulpy noir thriller with a mystery. And they stick somewhat close to the book there. They do a very good job of being true to it. Now, if we follow the books, the second book is basically Saving Private Ryan with the heist from Fast Five. Okay. I'm not even kidding. It is a hardcore, the first third of it is a war film, because basically in the books, Kovacs, he gets his release, he gets a shit ton of money, he doesn't know what he wants except he wants off Earth, so he casts out to the fucking far fringe and then signs up with a merc company because killing and fighting is what he's good at. They get hired to go put down a civil war. And that's why it's a very sort of war thing.
Right.
And while he's in this war bit, he gets a lead on what could be a priceless treasure, and then it kind of flips into a heist. It works. It works really well because at the same time, they expand upon the universe and all of the aliens and the alien culture, because one of the things the show does a bad job of is pointing out that every single human colony exists because we are basically following the star maps of a race of aliens that we found fossil evidence of.
Right.
And so they're like, hey, these are where our worlds are, so we go there. And so it really kind of expands on that. The third book becomes more of a human tragedy because he finally gets an answer about his lost love, which wasn't Kelchrist Falconer. Do you remember in the very first episode, the girl that when he was having the shower and they're cleaning the stacks and she gets gunned down? Mm-hmm. He was looking for her.
Oh, right.
Because in his mind, Kel is dead. Kel has been dead forever and like irretrievably dead.
Right.
And so it's just like that was the driving force of that. And then you find out through fucking alien magic that maybe Kel's consciousness survived, and like, holy shit, you go on a ride. So of course, what does Netflix do? They go for the lowest hanging fruit, where they're just like, we're going to pretend book 2 doesn't exist. We're going to go take what ends up being a minor plot twist of book 3. We're just going to blast that into the whole season. Job's a good one.
That explains a lot. It really, really does, because it isn't that there's a massive tone shift between season 1 and season 2 of the show, which is sort of expected. You don't expect the tone to shift between the shows. Mm-hmm. We see Takeshi Kovacs sort of change, and he's got this different sleeve, but like the show is taking an enormous amount of shortcuts. We talked about the fact that like he's an envoy, he's a super detective, but he's the dumbest motherfucker you've ever seen in the second season. Yes. The guy can't put 2 and 2 together in the second season, except for when he suddenly needs to pull something out of his ass, and then suddenly he's this immortal, Sherlock Holmes godman. Mm-hmm. The big issue outside of Anthony Mackie just not being able to carry this show at all is that there are other very talented actors in this show that can. And when they're outshining the protagonist of the show, the actor who plays Poe, it's so hard to watch a show where the protagonist and the main character is so far behind the other actors in the show that it just tears the show to pieces, because we have to spend so much time focusing on Poe and his story and everything that he's going through, which is all very entertaining because he's a tremendous actor and the character is absolutely lovable, and you want to know what happens to him and you want to feel for this AI that is slowly breaking down. But what they're trying to do with the show is they're trying to force bad acting down your throat, and they're also trying to force a love story down your throat, which just does not work on any level. It doesn't work. This is sort of like a study in how not to write a love story in a show, right? There was somebody recently that I was watching on YouTube who was talking about like Blade Runner, and they were talking about how like the interaction between Deckard and I can't remember her name, the female replicant woman, is like it's really forceful and it's really uncomfortable, and it's sort of like this.
Oh, it's super rapey.
Desperately, emotional thing that you're just like, this is sort of bad, but like I can sort of at least understand, like it feels real, It at least feels like this guy is this broken person who has no emotional capacity, who is now desperately alone, questioning his own reality, and, has this woman standing across from him who is beautiful, who he cares for. Inexplicably, he cares for her. And then, like, there's this scene where they connect, but, like, she doesn't really know what to do or how to react or anything like that. And yes, it comes off super rapey in our modern times. That was more believable than the horse shit that we saw between fucking Kel Christfalconer and Takeshi, where they're staring at each other going, I remember you, I love you, remember me. And she's like, I don't remember you, and I don't love you. And then like she'll bump her toe on a dresser and be like, I think I remember our love. Oh, it's gone. It's gone. Sorry, I got nothing.
Oh no, look at it.
It's so fucking bad that even by the end of the show, I was still shaking my head going like, this is terrible. Like, this is terrible.
I think, like, okay, so 2 other fucking things. Can we call the trend of the main protagonist being completely outshone by everyone around them as being dollhoused?
Yeah, that is absolutely what it should be called. It's 100% it's dollhoused.
So
speaking of that, actor from Dollhouse shows up in Altered Carbon, season 1 and season 2.
Indeed. So I mean, like, yeah, I just needed to throw that out. But like I said, it just, season 2 was such a fucking lazy betrayal of everything. It was a betrayal of the source content. It was a betrayal of like the actors and the stories and everything like that. And they literally, like I said, they just went for the laziest possible fucking route that had no world building, no anything. Because again, the the kind of final twist of like, holy shit, is this Kel's consciousness? Like, what does this mean? What are the implications? Is really where the book ends. And they just kind of hang on it, where it's just like, holy fuck, this actually is Kel Christ Falconer. What are the implications of that? And the book kind of ends on that note, because that was such a minor point of the story.
Right.
Whereas here, like I said, they take what is effectively the Shyamalan twist of this book, and they're just like, fuck yeah, that's all we need. We're done here. Job's good.
Well, and even that wasn't even the twist that they played in the show. The twist that they played in the show was that a bunch of bad men burnt a bunch of babies, a bunch of alien babies. They burnt them, and they were like, "This is our planet now. I'm going to name it after me." And it has nothing to do with the story, and it has no impact on any of the characters. It has no impact whatsoever on the world. And even when you get to the end, when there's like the wackadoo alien consciousness running through the computer brains, stack hopping and doing all of its stupid stuff, like, you just don't care.
Dude, I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah,
like
right?
that is how meaningless that show was. And again, I was so excited.
That was the twist they tried to play.
I was so fucking excited for this that I even told you in the lead up, like I started like 10 days before season 2 dropped, I started rewatching season 1 episode a day, just to really just get fresh, get back with the characters. Because one of the things that I absolutely fucking hate Netflix for is, like you said, well, let's wait 2 years. And then the season 2 starts directly after. Like, only 3 moments have passed. I hope you remember who the fuck everyone is and what they is doing, because we ain't gonna tell you shit.
Takeshi Kovacs clearly walked out as a man. He's a woman now.
Right. But like even beyond that, so like I said, my excitement for that season, as someone who enjoys Richard Morgan's writing, who, you know, I've read the fucking books, I watched season 1 in anticipation, and then season 2 was such a letdown that I'm just like, I don't know whether Altered Carbon is like season 2 is the biggest letdown, or Jessica Jones season 2 is, but they're both shit. And like, you know,
you're just crossing over actors, man. You're gonna hit Kevin Bacon soon here.
Fuck, right?
Right? Because remember the stupid like bounty hunter? That was fucking in Jessica Jones and Luke Cage. That was fucking, what's her name? Misty Knight.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like it. My problem with the show is that they didn't do anything to progress the story, and it was an absolute moment where Anthony Mackie was dollhoused, and it was hilarious that he was dollhoused by the double-sleeved past version of Takeshi Kovacs, where like that actor who had like a couple of scenes in the first season showed up and just destroyed every scene that he was in the show. But again, it's terrible because none of what the characters do is believable, and none of the character turns are believable. Kelkris Falconer's character is not believable, and even when they bring Takeshi Kovacs' double-sleeved past version clone back and they put him in a new body, he almost immediately changes sides. You know, like I think it's in the span of like a single episode after he murders Misty Knight's father. He's just like, whoa, I don't like this anymore, because he sees Kelkris Falconer, and apparently that's all he fucking needed. You know, like this is supposed to be the version of him when he was high on the fucking, you know, military bandwagon. But apparently all he has to do is like see something between the two of them and just go, yep, I'm there. I'm 100% flip flop, flippity flop flop. And then that's the end of it. I'm not interested whatsoever for season 3. And like, that's a real fault for the show, because, you know, what we're talking about, so much when we're talking about the show, almost has nothing to do with the story of the show, because the story is dog shit. Like, it really is just dog shit. The only interesting story is about Poe's AI breaking down, and the fact that he doesn't want to have to do a restart because there's a possibility that when he does a restart, he's going to lose all of his memories. And he feels like a person now. He doesn't want to lose these memories. He doesn't want to lose his one friend. He doesn't want to lose, his affection for the girl from season 1 who just shows up in a bunch of hallucinations for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
and then actually going through that whole arc with him is really interesting because it is, a story that you can sort of see the humanity in this inhuman thing, right? And more so than a lot of the characters in the show who we're supposed to feel are human characters. Like it really fails on all levels. The fact that he's in this show at all.
Well, yeah, because he certainly isn't in the books.
No.
It's literally just the actor did such a good job that they were like, why the fuck would we flush this away? But what I don't understand, because you're absolutely right, the post stuff was engaging and you did want to know how that was going to play out. And then they went super stupid on the last episode with it, and I hated it. But,
yeah, it was pretty dumb.
Oh, so dumb. But like, here's the thing. What they had an opportunity to do was to contrast where you have this AI who is effectively being a human around him, while you have a human who is so emotionally stunted and shut down that he is acting like a machine, because that's what he should be. That's the thing with Takeshi Kovacs as a character. And what you got out of Joel Kinnaman is, yes, he is like a machine. He's picking up on everything. He doesn't care about people. They even had that bit in the first season where it's just like, build your wolf pack because you need support and they are expendable.
Right.
And like, that is literally the modus operandi of a fucking envoy. It is literally like this human who is acting like a machine without emotions. And you could have had such an interesting thing foiling it with this machine who is acting human. And you can, like, it had potential, but I don't think the writers caught that. Like, I just don't think that the writers of season 2 read the source material at all.
No, they decided it was a love story. And especially when we had a romantic love story between him and, I don't remember her name. I'm just going to go on a limb and say it was Rosalita. Rosalita Mendoza. Yeah, there you go. I don't know. I don't remember. But that was believable. It was sort of a believable situation. He was sleeved into her ex, so there was something there already, and it made sense for that to go the way that it did. And she's way hotter than Kelkris Falconer, so it was way better. And there's my man moment right there. But the show just, when you get into season 2, it's so different. All of the things that you watched in season 1 that you expected to carry over to season 2 didn't. Mm-hmm. Takeshi Kovacs is a drug addict, and he's a alcoholic, and he's a asshole, and he's all these different things. And in this one, when you started out, he's a lounge singer.
Yeah.
It's the exact opposite thing that he should be doing, just so that they can have this like ha moment where the lounge singer walks out and she's like, "You going somewhere, Takeshi?" and it's fucking stupid. Then he gets into Anthony Mackie and he just sort of casually drinks whiskey. It's very, very frustrating to see even the baseline things we know about a character just be removed because either A, the actor can't pull it off, or B, they just don't feel like there's any time for that in the story. And instead he's just a lovesick puppy running from world to world, trying to search out Kelkris Falconer. And even when they do meet back up, there's no chemistry. There's no... You look at the two of them and all there is like, "You can't be with me. I'm not good for you." And then the next person, "Oh, well, no, you can't be with me because I love you too much and that's bad." Like it's just absolute soap opera horseshit. And the show is dripping with that in every single scene. And Takeshi Kovacs was sort of a likable asshole, and now he's just an unlikable asshole. The writers were not able to portray sort of the same level of like snarky, I don't give a shit about my life, I don't give a shit about you, and I don't give a shit about anything else, the world is a joke, into a character that's just like, oh, my love is why I'm sad, and everything is about my love. It fails. It fails so badly, and it was such a letdown. If it weren't for Poe, it would be utterly unwatchable.
No, and like I said, I think you got it. Like for me, it just hugely disappointing. Where like it was so bad, and I was so disappointed that like it gets to that like when a movie is so bad that you're just like you hate watching it, and you're not going to go to the bathroom. Where you're like, especially if you're in theater, right? Like You're like, I can't go to the bathroom because I might miss the literal only redeeming moment to make my time worthwhile, and you just hate watch it. And that's what it turned into. Fuck, I hated that so bad.
It really did turn into that. I actually had to force myself to finish it because I got 5 episodes in, and I fell asleep no less than 3 times while watching this show. And not even like late. Like, 10 o'clock, I'm falling asleep. That's how boring it was. And I'm a person who stays up to like 1 and 2 in the morning regularly. Like, that's my bedtime. So for me to be so bored that I'm falling asleep at like 10, that show's pretty fucking bad. Like, it's genuinely very, very bad. All right. Any last thoughts on that, Nathan, before we get into our Dungeons and Dragons convos?
No, like I said, there's really nothing that I can say because there is so little that I enjoyed. That I'm just like, I'd just be rehashing about how shit it was.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. All right, so we're going to do a little bit of Dungeon Master's Corner. So there was a question posted to the DM Academy subreddit. This is generally where I find my questions if people who listen to the show don't send me questions that I think would be, good for the show. So if you guys have questions you'd like me to answer on the show or Nathan and I to talk about, please shoot them over my way or post them in the comments and we'll try to get to them and go over them. If somebody did post it and I forgot about it, it's been a month, so hey. So this one was posted by Broccoli. I like that name. It's adding an NPC long-term to a party. He goes, I'm a first-time DM here looking for help with a party of first-time players. What are some thoughts and suggestions on creating a character run by myself that would fight and travel with the party? I have 3 players all starting at level 1, a barbarian, a bard, and a druid. My concern is that they might be weak on the physical side of combat. I would just like a fighter or monk who tags along to help out. Also, I thought this would make for an easy way to add some exposition during the sessions without just stopping to explain or waiting for them to ask the right questions. This character would be fairly knowledgeable of the world and happily tell the players things they need to know. My players wanted a more linear storyline, so I could use said character to suggest things or talk about interesting parts of the world. My NPC would rarely initiate any direct action or plan. I've had a lot of fun building the campaign and world for this group and really hope they get into the game. I just thought this would be a more immersive way to get them into the world. Thanks in advance for all the advice. All right. So this is something I've done, and you've been involved in both, or I would say at least 2 out of the 3 of the situations where this is something that I've done in games. So Erebrant and Guy would be the 2 examples that I would put out at you there, right? So before I give my perspective on it as the Dungeon Master, as always, Nathan, I would love to hear your perspective as a player.
I think it's great. I think it's a great idea for every single reason that Brock Coli was stating. When the DM has a character, one, you're able to push character to character role plays. Because you initiate them. And when you initiate them in character, we're going to respond in character, and you're able to really sort of break down those walls and those barriers. Because really, ever since, like, starting with Erebrant and sort of continuing into Guy, these are some of the most roleplay intensive campaigns I've ever played in. Mm-hmm. And part of that is when you're there in character, starting conversations, starting bar fights, doing whatever to kind of get shit rolling. it's easy for us to keep going in turn. Um, with that being said, like, obviously, fights, like, you're there, you do whatever. Just make sure you're tweaking the challenge rating to account for the fact that you are present playing a character that's going to be helping in. So the fights aren't too easy. But like I said, I love it because these are characters who do provide information in the world. So with Erebrant, this is a campaign where we fucking know nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, imagine being a tourist and you fucking get onto a bus and it drives you off in the wrong direction, dumps you off, and you have no fucking idea. You don't know what country you're in. You don't know where anything is. This is the level of knowledge that our characters had in that one. And so when we encountered Erebrant and he sort of became a tag along, um, and we kind of adopted him as a mascot.
Yes.
He was able to provide some of that world building information. Now, of course, he is more knowledgeable than us, but he is not God. He is not played as the DM. So just make sure that when you're doing that, you are keeping that lens on so it doesn't break things. So, you as the DM know everything. This character does not. Don't forget that, because that can break it. I don't think you've ever broken character like that where you've accidentally let slip fucking something that whoops the DM knows but Erebrant shouldn't or Guy
Right.
shouldn't. And honestly, I think it's super fun. And as a player, anything that makes my DM happy and keeps them engaged and having fun is something that I'm in for because I can't play without the DM.
There you go. Yeah, and again, I'm in agreement too. I think having the DM play long-term NPCs is a really good way to engage your players. As a DM, oftentimes you will start to see trends happen in your game. And this is an aspect of a long-term NPC that is actually really useful. So a lot of times DMs will complain, and we've actually answered questions about this on the show before, where their players are just not engaged. They're not talking to each other. They're not going into their backstory. They're just sort of quietly brooding because everyone is Batman. This is
Yeah.
the sort of thing that a long-term NPC can be very helpful in because you will have a character who, is part of the party who can just say like, hey man, like, why are you always so angry? What's that sword about? Hey, where'd you get that scar? Hey, everyone else has a family. You don't seem to have one. What's that about? And then the character will, with that door now fully open, will have the opportunity to have some conversations or at least start some inquiry between the other characters and, I guess between all of the players and their characters, right? The other really good thing about it is that, yes, you can interject a character into the game who has a lot of world knowledge and is a source of information. And a, sort of perpetual source of information can be good and bad depending on the party. So the way that I look at long-term NPCs played by the DM is that you do actually need to be really, really careful with them. So Nathan, I'll ask you this. What is the trait that both Guy and Erebrant share?
They're braggarts.
They're both braggarts and they're both kind of idiots.
Yeah.
It's the sort of thing that when you make an NPC that's sort of a long-term NPC, right? It's important to play the NPC's intelligence down sometimes because you don't want the players to become dependent on the NPC. In one of my other campaigns, this was the Warlock campaign that I ran, that I then killed them. One of the warlocks had an imp as his familiar. And I always make it a point in my games that if somebody has a familiar that can speak common, I roleplay the familiar. And the familiar becomes a long-term NPC that, will oftentimes interject or become part of conversations. And this NPC was one who was very, very knowledgeable. It was very, very old. He had a lot of knowledge about warlocks and the pact that they had made with the Queen of Air and Darkness and all of these other aspects of the story. So much so that the players actually became pretty dependent on him as a source of information. And when they couldn't think of anything, they'd be like, let's just ask your familiar. And the familiar would tell them what he thinks they should do. And they would be like, that's a great plan. And they just became sort of very dependent and lazy when it came to interacting with the campaign. It was easier for them to do that. Now, that said, 2 of the 3 characters in this campaign were role played as idiots as well. So it was like, yeah, him leading them around by the nose wasn't really so bad. I really do not like it when a DM looks at the party and says, this party is unbalanced. I'm going to put an NPC in there in order to balance the combat of the party. I think that's a mistake. I don't think that you should ever make that decision when it comes to the role play and the construction of your campaign, because oftentimes the players start to feel like they're getting more help than they're accomplishing things, right? You want the players to feel like they're accomplishing these feats, that they're the ones going out and doing this. You don't ever want them to feel like they're being helped along. And even in games that you've played with me, Nathan, there are times when an NPC shows up and he sort of Deus Ex Machinas the situation, and you're like, wow, it's fucking great that, this person's here. Even Erebrant, who is 4 levels lower than you are, when he does something well, you guys are like, fucking Erebrant, this dude's our clutch, pocket wizard. This dude's doing everything for us, because you don't ever want your players to feel like they're being overshadowed by an NPC. Mm-hmm. It's important to make sure that they're the stars of the show. So if you are going to interject an NPC into your campaign, I always recommend that they are either a central focus of the story, like they're sort of the fulcrum that the story is moving along. So in this case, that would be Guy, who's getting the band of old adventurers together, and the story sort of is surrounding his sprite son who came up out of the Underdark and is asking for help. And so Guy is sort of the guiding force in this. But Guy is also an idiot and a braggart, and he's not the guy you ask for a lot of information, because he's just not that guy. But he's there because he's integral to the story.
Yeah, and to give you an idea, like, what you were saying with like Erebrant, when we're just like, fuck yeah, super clutch. It wasn't even like he won a fight or he did something great. It was just like, I think you like cast like a chromatic orb and it hit and did a bit of damage, and we're just like, fuck yeah, because like we're not expecting anything out of it because that character doesn't overshadow us.
Yeah.
And at the same time, the way you play Guy is such that in our group dynamics, Guy is always suggesting ideas, but he is kind of an idiot and he is kind of a braggart. So all of those ideas are obviously bad. And it's kind of relegated and pushed him where it's just like our group dynamic is that like the 4 of us, if we're leaning one way, when Guy's like, I think we should do this, it's kind of like 2 votes for the other. Yeah. Where we're just like, hey, oh God, Guy thinks that's a great idea. I think we should maybe consider the alternative.
I think that long-term NPCs are great. And as a DM, I can tell you that when you are DMing a party that is not doing a lot of NPC interactions, right? Especially like longer dungeons where the only NPCs they run into are like, skittering goblins or like a talking spider or some shit, or like a mummy, or, like there's just not a lot of opportunity to role play. Mm-hmm. And as a DM, you're just sort of sitting back and watching things happen, and you're not really engaged in what's going on, even though you're running everything, especially if your players are doing a lot of role playing. I love watching my players role play. I love just listening to what they're doing, and I love all of that stuff. But it is that much more fun when I get to take part in it as an NPC who is a character that I've built, who has a backstory, who plays a very integral role in the story. And for Erebrant, that was completely organic. I had no intention of putting Erebrant into the story. But it just so happened that the role play went in that direction, and the party was talking about like, well, we need to start building up a force. We need to start building up an army of like people who we can go to fight this big bad. We need to get powerful magic items. We need to do this. And we don't know anything about anything right now because we're tourists in this part of the world, so we should probably find a guide. And it just made perfect sense to put this guy into the story and have him be sort of like a comic relief, but also a character who is a facilitator of your story. You guys also didn't have any money, and Erebrant had a lot of money. And so it just became like, well, he's kind of here, not because we want him here, but because he's willing to pay. Yeah. So because he's willing to pay, he's in the group. He's part of our group. And then that's sort of the direction we go. But it's a touchy, and it's a very hard thing to balance long-term NPCs. And if you're balancing it in such a way where you're like, I feel like this party is deficient, I need to add a character in order to fix them. I've actually had that recently happen in a campaign that I'm playing in, where the DM and one of the players thought, well, we didn't have enough healing. So one of the characters had another character was a female character who was just with him. But she didn't talk and she didn't do anything. She was just sort of a heal bot. And it was very frustrating as a player because that decision was made based on the fact that they didn't know that my alchemist has a lot of healing. So we don't need this character here. And eventually we came up with an idea for that character to sort of leave the party and go in another direction. And then we went off and did our own thing. And it's been much, much better since then because it's good. Now, are we a balanced party? No, by no means are we a balanced party. We don't have any proper magic casters. We don't have any rogues. We don't have, the party we're in is my alchemist character, a paladin, a fighter, and a monk. So we're a little top heavy. We're a bunch of thick boys. So it's very much a situation of like, yeah, we're an unbalanced party, but that's what makes it interesting. The most interesting games I've ever run and ever played in have been the unbalanced parties where we are lacking certain tools to get jobs done. Any party without a rogue is always going to be somewhat deficient because rogues do so much in the game and they have so much utility that if you don't have somebody who can use thieves tools in your group, boy, you're in a lot of trouble. And it means that you have to take different avenues in order to solve certain problems. If you don't have a proper healer in your group, you're always going to run into that wall of like, well, we have to be careful in long fights because we just don't have the potential to continue to heal throughout these long fights. Same thing with a magic user. If you don't have a wizard or a sorcerer in your party, or like a druid or a bard or something where it's like a full caster class character, you're going to run into a lot of problems, especially when you go into the dungeon full of ghosts that nobody can hurt. There's always going to be interesting things that come up. Don't ever create an NPC to fix what you think is a deficiency with your party. Let them choose what they want to choose. Live or die, let them figure it out, man. That's what Dungeons and Dragons is about. That's what makes it interesting. And if you're putting an NPC in for that reason, either your players are going to see that as the reason that it's in there, or they're going to sort of resent that NPC for being there.
Well, and especially because, like, when you do have deficiencies as characters, we kind of learn to fucking cover that, right? So let's talk about the most deficient party we ever ran, and let's talk about fucking Rise of Tiamat.
Horde of the Dragon Queen.
Fucking, so basically, Rise of Tiamat was such that we had... Actually, you know what? Rise of Tiamat was better because I was a druid. Let's talk Horde of the Dragon Queen.
Yeah, Horde of the Dragon Queen is what I was aiming at.
Horde of the Dragon Queen, like, we were fucked, man. Like, we had a barbarian, we had a wizard, we had a fighter rogue, and while we technically had a bard, he went Valor Bard and just kept trying to hit things with his sword and never healed. Yes. In fact, it was 9 months into that campaign before he cast a single healing spell on himself, and we were quite upset.
Yes. Fun.
But here was the thing. We, despite being absolutely fucked every time a dragon came by, because how many of us are like ground-based melee? What's that? 75%? Oh, fuck. What it meant was we learned, we were trying to work on our positioning a bit better. We would work on holding actions. We would work on doing all of these things. We as players learned to play to account for our horrific party makeup, and do certain things that would end up being more beneficial to us and helpful. Our fighter rogue ended up going Battle Master just to get the fucking healing dies to try to give us a little bit of a healing boost. Like, these were all things that these were problems that we as players made for ourselves by not having a balanced party, but you don't DM like that. You're very much play whatever the fuck you want. Oh, what's that? We have 4 fighters? Shit, you had an all warlock party, for God's sakes. Yeah. If we want to talk about like the worst not balanced party, let's talk about all warlocks, right? So it's just like this is one of the things where it's always just like play what you want, and then we as players can figure shit out. Because if you are just going to throw in an NPC because you think we fucked it up, yeah, it might help in situation A, but not in B, C, D. But we also see what you're doing. Like, let us live with our mistakes. That's why when my wizard died, I didn't make a new wizard, and I didn't decide that, like, hey, we should get another rogue. I did work on maybe filling that gap because, hey, my character is dead. I talked you into letting me play a druid again, and the first rule of ever DMing for me is never let me play a druid.
Correct.
I will always beg to play a druid, and I will always hate the
Hate it
experience
and
of
bitch
playing
and
a druid.
complain about it constantly. Yes.
Oh my god, I hate druids, but I cannot get over the idea
No,
of
you
druids.
love druids. You do. You just don't want them to play the way that they play. That's the problem with them. In your mind, druids should play a very different way, and that's not the way that they really play. Well, and the interesting thing about the Horde of the Dragon Queen campaign with the group that you guys had put together was you had to start working together really well as a team, which meant that even though, Maddie's character is off doing whatever the fuck he's doing, the rest of you were sort of like, well, we need to DPS down the biggest threats as quickly as possible. And that was the whole, that was the origination of like the Team Dirt PS or SEAL Team
Yeah.
DPS, was if we can just hit this thing as hard as fucking possible, as quickly as possible, we don't have to deal with 2 or 3 rounds of combat. And because of that, so many things that you dealt with and so many fights that you dealt with were just hit it as hard as we fucking can before we get to the point where it's the point of
We
no
need
return.
to be heals.
That's right. So long as we've got a couple of health potions in our back pocket, we just have to drill the shit out of this thing and hit it as hard as we can, as quickly as possible. And that did change when you brought the druid in, and there were a lot of different shifts in the game, but that happened because of the party that you made. For the elemental campaign that I put together for you guys, I forced you to build a balanced party, and it was a balanced 100% party. It's a cleric, a sorcerer, a fighter, and a monk. And when that party got into a fight, you guys had every base covered in every fight. Like, there's very few situations where you're actually going to feel like you're missing something, and that's really just the rogue situations. But what's interesting about Erebrant, when he came into that party as a long-term NPC, like, he didn't add anything to that party. Like, he didn't add any combat prowess or anything. He actually was more of a detriment to
wizard. When we have a level 8 sorcerer, he wasn't doing shit other than eating my healing spell.
Yes, he
my
was a
spell
liability.
slots.
Big liability. But when you are in a balanced party like that, what I also did to throw the wrench into your gears, even though I built a balanced party for you and forced you guys to play certain characters with certain roles, I also forced a lot of distrust and strife into the party as part of the backstory. So it still took you a really long time to actually start meshing together as a group and start working together with sort of the same drives and intents and stuff like that. And I think that that's sort of the beauty of Dungeons and Dragons, and that's why you can't try to fix your players by adding an NPC in, right? But adding an NPC for story, as a story hook, as somebody who's like there to help them get involved in the world, who's there to sort of guide them through it, is great. But you absolutely need to roleplay that character regularly. With Guy in the Old and Busted campaign, he is regularly roleplaying. He's in every conversation. He's always part of the conversation because he can't just be the guy who stands in the background until you need him. He can't just be the guy who isn't going to be a part of the story until you guys need him to be a part of the story. He has to be a regular part of the story, and he needs to be a part of every scene, and he needs to be interjecting and expressing his character in every single scene and every single part of roleplay where it makes sense for him to do that. Or it's like the campaign that I played where we just have a heal bot who doesn't say anything. And there's like no reason for that character to be there, and I don't care, and I want them to die because, man, we need to get rid of this character so that we can just play our Dungeons and Dragons party as opposed to trying to, play quote unquote a balanced party. There's always going to be aspects of Dungeons and Dragons group that is deficient unless you've got like an 8-man party, where like every single base is covered. So, I mean, I think that's an interesting one. I hope people do play more NPCs. I actually watched an interesting video on this about a year ago where the guy was talking about Dungeon Master controlled NPCs on the long term, and he was utterly against it. He said he felt like it was taking the spotlight off your players, that you can never truly play the character because your knowledge and the character's knowledge are going to overlap too much, and that you can't do it. And I fully disagreed with that. I felt like if you're a good DM and you know how to draw that line in your mind between what this character would do and say and know and what you say and know, then it absolutely can work. And you as a player love every time I've done it. So, I mean, there's the proof in the pudding.
Yeah, and like that's the thing where it's just like the only time that I would say like you should never do it is if, like you said, you have a huge party. Oh, you got a party of 8? Well, like, stay the fuck out. You're already gonna struggle with a group that big. But like again, I don't understand that thinking, because that almost feels a little adversarial. Like, the way I perceive the sort of players and DM, like I've said it before, we're all dating. Like this is what it is. We're just like, it's basically group dating. We're working on building relationships and communicating. And at the end of the day, my opinion on it is, if everyone isn't having fun, what's the point? And to say like, oh, you should never do it and it's terrible. Again, I have to question why. Like, why do you think it's that way? And if it's like one of those situations where it's just like, oh, the character might know more because you as the GM know more, it's just like, well, it's easy enough for you to just assume that this isn't going to happen. And if you ever let something slip, just be like, all right, listen, guys, no, fuck, he didn't say that. Shouldn't have said that. Like, just let's rewind 5 seconds ago.
Yeah.
And we'll carry it on. And we as players are fine. Because how many times are we like, role-playing in character, breaking character to crack jokes and laugh at each other? Like,
yeah,
that's like literally our entire last session of our Old and Busted campaign was like 20 minutes of role-play, 10 minutes of out of character dicking around and laughing.
Yes.
Like the whole night was literally just, I feel like it was one of those, like, it was almost like an improv game where we all were just trying to break everyone else.
Oh yeah.
Oh, it was fucking
without
great.
a doubt. It was fantastic. All right, so Dungeons and Dragons and diversity, Nathan. Wizards of the Coast put out a blog post last week, Diversity in Dungeons and Dragons, where they talk about changes that they are planning to make to the world of Faerun in order to provide a more diverse playing environment that is more inclusive and that is more accepting and allows characters to play allows players to make the characters they really want to play. There's a couple of core points that they make, and I'm just going to paraphrase this.
I'm so glad the Fair and So White campaign worked.
Yeah. There's a lot of things in this that they're sort of pointing at that are sort of interesting. I understand why they're doing it, but it's silly, in my opinion. So the first point that they're making is that there are certain races in Dungeons and Dragons that are expressly evil. Right? The two that they point out are drow and orcs, where they go, okay, orcs are evil, drow are evil. And they felt like it was bad and racist in this fantasy world in some way that there is a race that is expressly evil. Now, one of them, of course, well, in both of these cases, both of them have darker skin. So take that wherever the fuck you want to take that. But yeah, like they basically are going to make changes to the world in order to say like, well, drow, who are this evil race of elves that live underground, are not going to be expressly evil. They're going to be a race that has the potential for good, which already exists in Dungeons and Dragons because we've got Dritz and we've got other characters who are drow who are not evil.
Yeah. Like, listen, to me, I've always felt like the all orcs are evil, all drow are evil has just been lazy. And it's more of a holdover from like the Tolkien 80s than it is from, anything to do with like our modern society, but sure, whatever floats your boat.
Right. Well, and I think that again, a lot of it is the result of game mechanics, right? When you look at a drow character, it's going to show its alignment, and its alignment is like neutral evil, right? Or chaotic evil, like orcs are chaotic evil. I think drow are neutral evil or something like that. So that insinuates that these things are evil. Now you can play a half orc in the game that can be anything you want it to be.
I've played a lawful good half orc paladin. He was a fucking blast.
Yeah, and I mean I've played straight up orc characters who were not evil. I'm running a campaign right now where the arc is focused very heavily on a tribe of orcs that, are led by this evil person, but that they are not expressly evil. They're just sort of this tribe. And yes, they fight. And yes, they're sort of like Vikings, where it's like, yeah, they do a lot of really bad shit regularly, and it's sort of part of their culture. But like, they're not evil by nature. They just, they don't care. They don't have the same values as everyone else does, right? Like, that's sort of the idea behind them. Like Klingons. And, it's, I don't think like that needed to be clarified. And I don't think there was ever a problem in any Dungeons and Dragons campaign where somebody was there going like, but why does that orc have to be mean? Like, why does he have to be evil? And
well, especially because so much of okay.
I want to add this to it, and then I think it might color what your next thing is. There was also a global news article that was posted last week following this thing, talking about how orcs and drow are black people.
What? Sure. No, listen. You cannot talk about fantasy worlds, especially D&D, without addressing the Tolkien in the room.
Yeah.
Because so much of it is based off of Tolkien. Like they share a same common fucking wellspring of ideas. And so orcs being evil always had to do with the fact that orcs are evil. They fight for Sauron. And end of story. And so like that's kind of it. And like I said, I always felt that it was lazy to just be like, this stereotype applies to all of them. End of story. So I'm all for them saying we're going to make them morally and culturally complex. Great. Stop being lazy. It's been 40 fucking years. Like,
I don't even think that's it. I just feel like it was unnecessary, like even in Tolkien, and the nerd in me is going to go, well, Nathan, push my glasses up. The orcs were elves once, but they were corrupted by the dark powers, and that's why they're expressly evil. It's not that they just were a race that popped up out of nowhere and ended up being expressly evil. It's that they were.
Listen, we all know they're mushroom spores from space.
Yes, fine. I know they're mushroom spores from space, and I'm all for that. Okay, it's just sort of. I think it's sort of asinine to say that we need to clarify this for players. That's the only problem I have. Not that they're doing it. I have no problem with it whatsoever. I'm literally doing it in one of my campaigns because it makes sense.
Like, listen, I think calling this point out is completely unnecessary. Like, I am all for making them more nuanced than they're all evil. Because when you have that sort of blanket statement, you block it off from beginner or new players. It makes those races less accessible, because if you're experienced enough, you can say like, hey, I've got this fucking hook, like Driz to Warden, I'm a drow with a heart of gold, motherfuckers. And like, you can do that and you have no problems with it. But when you are a fucking new player and they throw this fucking 400-page book at you to start, and let's be real, you can't even build an orc out of that, only a half orc. Trying to make sense of things, you try to fit yourself into more comfortable boxes. So that's why I'm all for this change happening. I just don't understand why they're calling it out and saying, we're being diverse. Look.
Well, here's the other aspect of that article. That's going to be an interesting follow-up conversation. Basically, what they're saying is that they also don't think that the racial stat bonuses should apply, and that they're going to be releasing rules where you can make your own stat bonuses regardless of what race you are. So, if you want to be a dwarf with +2 dexterity because that's more inclusive, or let's say you're an elf who identifies as a dwarf, I don't know, you have the option to not be bound by your racist racial stat increases. That was sort of the thing that made me kind of roll my eyes. As a DM, I don't like that. I don't want anything to do with that. I want players to play the fantasy characters that they create. I'm not saying you can't play a dwarf who's a rogue or you
Mm-hmm.
can't play a dwarf who's this, but dwarves are big, thick, stocky people who are
Yeah.
resistant to poison, and by
Like, listen.
nature they are this type of person. I am not saying that that you can't play a skinny dwarf who was just never as big as anyone else at playing kickball down in the underground city. But when we're only talking about a +1 or a +2 stat bonus, you can still make that character. You can still make all of those characters with what you already have. But actually saying, well, we're going to make rules for it so that you can just pick whatever stat bonuses you want. As a DM, like, I hate that.
But that already exists. It's called human. +1 to everything. Human.
Well,
no, listen, I dislike it as well because part of the flavor of character creation always involved picking your race. And listen, there are some times where I'm absolutely building a character to advantage, as in I have an idea for a character that I want to play and the race is meaningless.
Yes.
Like the race of that character is meaningless, so I'm obviously going to take the one that works best.
Sure.
Right? Oh, it's a charisma caster. I'm going to be a half elf. They get +2. That's great. Doesn't matter.
Done and done.
But there are other times where the identity of that character was more meaningful. Like the life cleric I always wanted to play was a fucking hill dwarf.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this fucking ex-soldier hill dwarf that like found God after seeing some fucking atrocities. And so, yeah, he's a big fucking burly con heavy dwarf with no bonuses to wisdom. But that didn't matter because the role-playing hooks of that character mattered more than the stat bonuses.
Yeah.
Because even as you said, we're talking at most 2 points.
Yeah, and
at most 2 points.
Yeah, it just doesn't matter, and it's an unnecessary thing to do, and it makes me question the purpose behind it. I mean, obviously there was probably some heat where people, I mean, the internet points at everything and says it's racist at some point, or that it's not diverse enough, or that it's not inclusive enough. And then when things try to be diverse or inclusive, they say that's still not enough. So I think it's just the company looking at it and going like, we need to do something because we're starting to hear these rumblings. And if we don't do something about it, Global News is going to post an article about how orcs are black people, and it's going to make everyone upset. And it was funny because like they got their blog post out like before that article dropped. And it was one of those things where it was like, they beat him to the punch, man. They already beat him to the punch. Like, you can't even put that article up now because, hey, they're already fixing it.
Listen, I think that is like, it's such a fucking stretch. Yeah. Like, there, as someone who's been playing D&D for like 5 years and has been aware of D&D since the fucking 90s, again, I don't look at orcs and drow as, they're black people, that's why their skin colors are different. It's always been Tolkien. It's because fucking Tolkien. Like, this is the root of fantasy. Like, you have to understand his impact on fantasy worlds is monumental.
Well, and again,
we take tropes, we take things that he invented and just treat them as tropes. Like, this is how influential he was. And I think anyone that's going to look at an orc and just be like, well, clearly that's a black person, and not clearly he's read The Hobbit, I think you're missing the fucking point.
Well, and the craziest thing about that is, and again, take this with a grain of salt because Nathan and I are both, white men in North America. So, don't get angry at me and call me a racist, right? But it is very hard for me as a player. Now, again, I have very dark skin. I've always said my greatest privilege on the planet is that nobody knows what the fuck I am. So nobody knows what my ethnicity is. So I just get a free pass on virtually everything. But people who know me know that I am technically white. And that, so take this with a grain of salt. Yeah, exactly. What I'm saying is that it's very hard for me to get into the mindset of a person who sits down to play Dungeons and Dragons, sees an orc or sees a drow and says that represents black people in a game where people of color already exist.
Yeah.
They are humans. Keep in mind, mm-hmm. Humans of color already exist. So, there's just so much, projection of your own
Yes.
issues there from my own perspective, right? When I look at
Yeah.
the Githyanki, I don't go, well, that's racist against Asian people. They're yellow-skinned Asian-inspired race of monks. It's kind of racist if you want to go down that road. It's like, no, they're another race of people. There are Asian-inspired human races in D&D already. These things are just drawing from the culture that we have around us, and there's always going to be a similarity to something that exists in our world, no matter what you do. You know, I mean, I find it incredibly racist that every ghost in D&D is white. That has been Jaded Gamercast for this week. My name is Lang.
I'm Nathan.
Have a good one.
Cheers.